Australia's prosperity narrative centers on booming cities, wealthy suburbs, and endless opportunity. Sydney gleams with $2 million median homes. Melbourne attracts global talent, but this story is incomplete. Behind the postcard version of Australia exists another reality: cities where median household incomes fall below $30,000 annually, where 1 in 5 residents live below the poverty line, and where families struggle to afford basic necessities despite working full-time employment. These are not remote outback settlements that nobody expected to thrive. These are real cities with hospitals, schools, and infrastructure. Cities where entire communities have been economically abandoned. Today, we are revealing 10 of Australia's poorest cities in 2026, and some of these might genuinely shock you. If you find this valuable, consider subscribing because we cover economic realities that mainstream media refuses to acknowledge. Let us begin. Number 10. Mungalala, Queensland. Mungalala holds the unenviable distinction of being Australia's poorest town when measured by mean taxable income. The Australian Taxation Office listed Mungalala as having the lowest average income by postcode, making it the statistical epicenter of poverty in Australia. Located in southwest Queensland, Mungalala is a town that time forgot and the economy abandoned. Mean taxable income sits below $20,000 annually. This figure is not a statistical anomaly. It represents the lived reality of residents who work but earn almost nothing, families who cannot afford basic medical care, and communities where emergency food assistance has become routine. What makes Mungalala particularly tragic is that residents are not unemployed, they work. They work in agriculture, small services, and whatever employment the local economy permits. They simply earn almost nothing. The median age is climbing as young people flee. Population declined from approximately 300 in 2010 to barely 200 by 2026. The one Methodist church that served the community closed because the congregation could no longer support it. Businesses shut down not because demand disappeared, but because customers literally cannot spend money. Mungalala represents what happens when regional economic collapse combines with geographic isolation. Residents cannot simply relocate to find better work. Moving requires money for deposits, travel, and startup costs that people earning $20,000 annually cannot afford. Number 9. Alice Springs, Northern Territory. Alice Springs, the iconic red center city at Australia's geographic heart, ranks among the nation's poorest urban areas when measured by median household income. The city struggles with a poverty rate exceeding 18%, while above the national average of 14.2%. This poverty exists despite the city's size and infrastructure. Alice Springs has a population of approximately 25,000 hospitals, schools, and government services. Yet it remains economically devastated. The city's median household income falls substantially below the national median. Employment is dominated by government services, tourism, and mining sector operations, none of which provide sufficient wages to lift residents above the poverty line. The intergenerational trauma affecting Aboriginal communities, substance abuse crises requiring emergency protocols, and the town's remoteness creating geographic employment constraints combine to ensure persistent poverty. 1 in 3 children in Alice Springs lives below the poverty line. When children cannot afford adequate nutrition, housing stability, or educational resources, the poverty cycle perpetuates into the next generation. Number 8. Rockhampton, Queensland. Rockhampton's poverty is directly connected to its economic collapse. The cattle industry that historically sustained the city has contracted severely. Mining operations that provided supplementary employment have become unreliable. Youth unemployment exceeds 25%, meaning 1 in 4 young people seeking work cannot find employment. When young people cannot find work, they cannot afford housing, cannot start relationships or families, and must either leave or remain dependent on family support systems already stressed by poverty. Mean household income in Rockhampton sits below $35,000 annually. The poverty rate reaches 17%. Families choosing to stay in the city despite economic devastation often cannot leave because they lack the financial resources to relocate. A parent earning $30,000 annually cannot save a deposit for moving costs, application fees, and initial rental payments in a larger city. They remain trapped in a low-wage local economy, unable to escape despite economic desperation. Number 7. Townsville, Queensland. Townsville's poverty worsened dramatically following the nickel refinery closure and BHP's operational suspension, which eliminated thousands of jobs. The city now experiences poverty rates exceeding 16%. Median household income for working families has declined as mining wages disappeared and alternative employment failed to materialize. The city faces what economists call structural poverty embedded in the economic structure rather than caused by individual unemployment. Townsville has educated workforce members unable to find employment matching their skills and education levels. Engineers work in retail, supervisors work in hospitality. Qualified professionals accept below qualifications employment because alternatives do not exist. This underemployment traps families in poverty despite education and work ethic. The city's infrastructure cannot expand rapidly enough to accommodate population needs, constraining residential development that might have diversified the economy. Poverty becomes self-perpetuating when the local economy cannot expand to create better-paying employment. Number 6. Launceston, Tasmania. Launceston, Tasmania's second-largest city with approximately 100,000 residents, struggles with poverty rates exceeding 15%. The city's manufacturing base contracted dramatically over the past 2 decades. The car parts manufacturing that employed thousands closed. Textile industries shifted overseas. Agricultural processing declined. Each closure eliminated better-paying working-class employment that did not require university credentials. Median household income in Launceston falls below $40,000 annually for substantial portions of the population. The city's service sector employment, hospitality, retail, aged care dominates the job market, but these positions typically pay $25,000 to $35,000 annually. A family relying on service sector incomes barely exceeds $60,000 combined, leaving minimal margin for housing costs, utilities, transportation, and unexpected emergencies. Launceston demonstrates that poverty is not limited to small towns or remote locations. Large regional cities face severe poverty when major industries collapse and alternative employment fails to develop. Number 5. Broken Hill, New South Wales. Broken Hill's legendary mining boom ended decades ago, but poverty never ended. The city's 16,000 residents struggle with poverty rates approaching 17%. Mining employment that provided middle-class wages has contracted to a fraction of historical levels. Youth unemployment exceeds 20%. The city's economy has shrunk so severely that alternative employment cannot compensate for mining losses. Median household income in Broken Hill has stagnated for years, while costs of living have risen. The city faces geographic isolation, making relocation difficult for families seeking better opportunities. Teachers, nurses, and government workers maintain reasonable incomes, but private sector employment pays substantially less. The service sector jobs available, retail, hospitality, aged care, offer poverty wages. A family in Broken Hill with 2 adults working full-time and available employment often still cannot exceed $50,000 household income, positioning them below or barely above the poverty line depending on housing costs and family composition. Number 4. Bundaberg, Queensland. Bundaberg, a regional Queensland city of approximately 50,000 residents, experiences poverty rates exceeding 18%. The city's agricultural base provides seasonal employment with minimal stability. Sugarcane cutting provides intense work for several months annually, followed by unemployment or underemployment for the remainder of the year. This seasonal employment pattern prevents families from earning sufficient annual income to escape poverty. Employment in Bundaberg typically pays $25,000 to $40,000 annually. The median household income falls below $38,000 when approximately 18% of the population lives below the poverty line and another significant portion lives barely above it. The community enters a poverty trap. Schools struggle with resources when families cannot afford educational materials. Medical services are underutilized when people cannot afford treatment. Housing remains substandard when families cannot afford maintenance or improvements. Bundaberg's poverty reflects agricultural workers trapped in seasonal employment without skill diversity enabling transition to better-paying sectors. Number 3. Mount Gambier, South Australia. Mount Gambier, a city of approximately 29,000 residents in South Australia, struggles with poverty rates around 17%. The city's economic base centered on forestry, limestone quarrying, and wool production has contracted substantially. Forestry employment declined sharply over the past decade. Limestone quarrying continues but employs far fewer workers than historically. Wool production faces persistent price pressures. Median household income in Mount Gambier falls below $40,000 annually. The city offers limited employment diversity, forcing residents into low-wage service sector positions. Healthcare professionals and government workers maintain reasonable incomes, but private sector employment dominates local opportunities, typically paying poorly. The city faces geographic isolation, making relocation difficult. Families born in Mount Gambier often remain because they cannot afford to leave despite limited economic prospects. Intergenerational poverty becomes entrenched when young people inherit their parents' economic circumstances and lack resources to pursue different pathways. Number 2. Hobart, Tasmania. Hobart's poverty situation appears paradoxical. The city is Tasmania's capital, Australia's second oldest city, and a functioning regional center with 230,000 residents. Yet poverty rates exceed 16%. The city's poverty coexists with extreme housing unaffordability, creating a devastating combination where residents struggle with both low incomes and skyrocketing housing costs. Rent has increased 43% in 5 years, while median household income stagnated. Many Hobart residents work full-time in healthcare, education, retail, and hospitality but still live below or marginally above the poverty line. A single parent working full-time in retail earning $38,000 annually cannot afford Hobart's rental market, where one-bedroom apartments exceed $350 weekly. The poverty experience in Hobart reflects working poverty, people employed full-time earning insufficient wages to afford basic housing and living expenses. This poverty type affects employed individuals who cannot escape low-wage employment. Hobart demonstrates that major cities are not immune to serious poverty when income growth fails to match cost of living increases. Number 1. Newcastle, New South Wales. Newcastle, Australia's second-largest regional city, with a population exceeding 300,000 residents, contains suburbs with poverty rates exceeding 20%. The postcode 2308, encompassing areas like Callaghan, recorded among Australia's lowest mean taxable incomes, approximately $20,000 annually. Newcastle's coal mining industry, that historically provided middle-class employment for generations, has contracted dramatically. Manufacturing employment that sustained working-class communities has largely disappeared. Newcastle's unemployment rate exceeds state and national averages. Youth unemployment approaches 12%. The median household income in disadvantaged suburbs falls below $30,000 annually. Newcastle presents a particularly tragic case because the city was once a thriving industrial center where unskilled workers could earn middle-class wages in coal mines, steel mills, and manufacturing operations. The transition from industrial employment to service sector employment devastated communities built around industrial jobs. A coal miner earning $90,000 annually faced unemployment or transitioned to retail work paying $32,000 annually. Families built lives around industrial wages, purchased homes based on industrial incomes, and faced financial catastrophe when those industries collapsed. Newcastle's poverty is not gradual decline, it is generational economic loss. People whose grandparents worked in mines, whose parents worked in manufacturing, now work in hospitality and retail. Each generation earns less than the previous one. The service sector employment available in Newcastle's future offers limited pathway to the middle-class wages that historical industries provided. Newcastle represents Australia's post-industrial poverty crisis in its starkest form. The pattern connecting these 10 cities share critical characteristics that explain their poverty. First, each depends historically on a primary industry that has contracted or collapsed. Mining, manufacturing, agriculture, and forestry industries that generated middle-class employment have either closed entirely or operated at substantially reduced capacity. Second, alternative employment has failed to develop. Cities cannot simply transition from mining to new industries without substantial government investment, workforce retraining, and business development. Most cities have received insufficient support to enable genuine economic transition. Third, geographic isolation or regional location constrains relocation options for residents. A family in Newcastle cannot simply move interstate because relocation requires capital that poverty does not permit. Australia's poverty crisis is not theoretical. It is embedded in real cities, affecting real families, creating intergenerational poverty cycles that become increasingly difficult to escape as costs of living rise while employment options stagnate. The cities ranked among Australia's poorest are not failing because residents lack work ethic or education. They are failing because the economic opportunities available simply do not pay enough for families to escape poverty.